And I'm here today with one of my very good friends and best-selling author, Joe Nassise. Joe, how many books did we decide you have published now? 50, 52, something like that?
I think it's 51.
51. Not bad. So when Joe speaks, it's probably a good idea to listen, folks. I'm just saying. Joe, before we get started, can you give us a quick intro on who you are and where we can find you, what we're looking for, all that kind of good stuff?
Sure. Where do you want me to do that? Just say it, or?
Oh yeah, just say it.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm at josephnassise.com. Nassise is Nassise. Same with Facebook, facebook.com/Joseph M as in Mike, Nassise. Those are the two main places I hang out.
And tell us about kind of like maybe your first and second big stories that you would want people to know about, or book series.
Okay. Kind of a funny anecdote. I wrote my first novel to win a case of beer in college, and that book sold to Simon & Schuster about 11 years later. So I started this business in a kind of crazy way. My two big series at this point are the Templar Chronicles, which is an urban fantasy series featuring modern day Templar knights that defend mankind from supernatural threats and enemies. And a spin-off from that, the Jeremiah Hunt trilogy, which takes one of the secondary characters from the Templar Chronicles and gives them a bigger role and a cooler story.
Right, that was nice to see, right?
Yeah. Denise Clearwater from the Templar series is one of the main characters in the Jeremiah Hunt series.
Okay, very cool. Well, Joe, I am so glad you're here. I'm delighted to have you. And we're just gonna jump in. We always start with mine because I'm a little crazy that way. Now, normally I would be reading from like a Word document, so that gives me a few more words. And instead, I'm just gonna read from the literally the first page of this, and then I'm gonna go ahead and make a couple comments, and I'll turn it over to Joe so he can tear it apart and tell me what I should have done differently. Because this is definitely in his wheelhouse, so I'm very anxious to hear what he has to say, and I hope people will still buy it after he's done. All right, here the epigraph before the story begins goes as follows: vigilance, diligence, humanity. Motto taken from the National Normative Policy Division Officer Handbook, 3rd edition, Washington, D.C., Office of the President. Chapter 1. Manic grinned at his wagon mates in the warm confines of the forest green, 6-wheeled APC. One of the men, Chandler Krakowski, was a new kid, fresh from NPD selection. He met Manic's eyes unswervingly through the clear blast shield on his helmet. "You ready?" Manic said through his smile. At work, his smiles were always genuine, if not necessarily mirthful. "Yes, Sergeant," Krakowski said. "'Cause you look a little nervous. You look nervous to you, JT?" Manic's best friend, Jamal Theodore Jackson, a giant of a man twice even Manic's bulky size, nodded sagely. He wriggled his broad shoulders under his body armor and cleared his throat. "He does, bro. Big time." The other officers in the wagon laughed the easy laugh of veterans. "Don't mind Sergeant Cruz," said Chief Miller, boss of the wagon, and elder statesman of the team at age 40. He kicked Manic's shin guard. "He likes to eat 'em young." I technically turned the page because I was in the middle of a sentence, but that's basically page 1. So welcome. That's your first taste of omnihumans within a concrete labyrinth. I'm enjoying the epigraph. I think it sets things up nicely because we don't know exactly what it's referring to, but it has, I think it has clearly it's a motto. Even before you read the word motto, like, okay, this belongs to a badge of some kind, an organization. Maybe it's law enforcement, maybe it's military, something like that. At least in my opinion, that's certainly what I was going for. Normally, I would want to start things with a little bit more of some fireworks, particularly given that it's an action thriller type of story. But I also had some people to introduce, and I think their personalities were, it was important to nail the personalities up front before we got into too much action, because those personalities are going to drive the book. And I'm going to say more about that, but I don't want to because that's not the point of the evening. Joey, did you have anything you wanted to say about that? Good. Okay. So I think I'm going to just leave it at that. I dislike that I introduce just on page 1, we've got 4 names that we have to keep track of. I think that's a mistake. I wish in retrospect now that I had spread that out just a little bit more, maybe introduce 1 or 2 people on page 1 and slowly salt in the other guys. I can say that we don't introduce a lot more after this. but still, 4 names on page 1 to me feels a bit cluttered. I think it worked. I don't think it's confusing, but if I were advising someone else, I'd be like, yeah, bring it down to 2 or 3 instead of 4. But
the first thing that strikes me is the use of APC, Armored Personnel Carrier.
Yes.
So, knowing that, although your reader might not, but I did, so that immediately told me military setting of some kind, maybe a police action, maybe a military action, something of that nature. So that gave me the sense that this was either going to be an action novel, a thriller, maybe science fiction, because we don't have an establishment of a setting yet. Mm-hmm. I would not have gotten urban fantasy from this at all, because it comes across as, hey, this is a squad, a special ops team or a SWAT team or something of that nature getting ready for a mission. So there isn't enough on that first page to give me that. Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing because it's a book, you started it halfway down the page.
Yeah.
About, so you're actually only giving me a half page. So
True.
we're not even getting a full page.
Yeah.
That said, it caught my attention because it immediately felt like the type of work, if I identify it as an action thriller, if I identify it as a military thriller, it has that vibe. It gives me the sense, both from the characterization, I don't think the names were all that difficult, and they weren't too many. Good. Because the only 2 I focused on were Manic and the kid. Because those are the only 2 at the moment that struck me as important to pay attention to. Chief Wilson, okay, he's in there, and his buddy with the 3 names, which I don't remember. I skipped right over those. He's like, all right, he's the sidekick, so I don't need to worry about him yet. I'm worrying about Manic and the kid. JT, was that the sidekick?
Yes, that's the buddy. Yeah.
So I caught that. James Theodore something. All right.
Yep.
The other thing that gave it away more as a squad of, a team, was your use of sergeant and then officers, because a sergeant is not an officer. So the use of officers made me think, oh, that now it's a police team, it's a SWAT team, it's something of that nature, versus, they're in a war somewhere and it's a team in Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yes, got it. That's a good call. Yeah.
So, my kind of three or four rules for an opening page. I'm sure you've kind of talked about this on previous first page Sundays, but for me personally, I look for a page to do a couple things. Mm-hmm. Number one, it has to get my interest. I think the biggest sin of a writer is to be boring. And I think that sin is compounded 10 times if you're boring on the first page.
Yes.
So gain my interest. You need to give me a sense of setting or place. I need to know where we are. And I need a general sense of genre. What kind of book is this going to be? Secondary level characteristics I look for is it clean? Does it make sense? Is it error-free? Those things all play together. If you give me a first page that's full of errors or, sentences that don't make sense, or you alluded to it, too many names, so I get confused, then my interest goes down. And so we don't want that. We don't want to give anybody a reason to turn away on page one. And last but not least, I usually like it to introduce the hero. There are plenty of books that don't. They get to the hero, a couple pages in or even a couple scenes in. But I like to know who's the main character. And I'm guessing from this one that Manic is the guy we're going to be following throughout the story.
That is correct. Yeah, I got that part right. Yeah. Or one of the two anyway, but yes, that's good.
Yeah, so it was interesting to me. I would keep reading. It's the kind of book I like, so it established that right away. Mm-hmm. I don't have a great sense of setting, and I don't have a great sense of genre yet, mm-hmm. But I'm halfway there in the genre thing,
Okay. I think, and as you point out, that's literally a half page, not even a full page, and I'm flipping through it. It doesn't take very long to figure out that there's something else paranormal or supernatural happening, so that's good. I'm glad
one thing I will comment on that I did was the epigraph.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people skip those, kind of, just
do they?
I don't. I find them fascinating, and I mine them for information about what the story is going to be about. And I love ones that, you know, quote from books that don't actually exist, because it makes me go to Amazon to see if that book exists. So I love those kind of things. In your case, this one gave me a motto. I felt like it was a unit motto. Mm-hmm. And so that then played in with my idea. It's some kind of SWAT team. It's some kind of, you know, a military organization, so to speak. You know, I mean, I think about my own buying habits. When I go to Amazon, I hit that look inside and I will read the first page or two of anything I buy. And so I assume other readers do that. And so if I'm doing that, I want to make sure that my book captures the people who are fans of this particular genre, but I also want to give the opportunity to bring new readers in. And so confusing a new reader is going to lose me that reader. But if I define the term, the reader's like, okay, I know what that is. I'll keep reading to see if I like what's here. You know, that the term itself may not turn off the reader, but not knowing the term could very well do so.
This is the title of this next piece is, if I get it correct. Yes, the title of this next piece is Poetic Justice. So the author has included a genre. I am going to not announce the genre yet. I think we're just going to do a cold read. And then,
good.
I'd be curious to see in the comments what you guys think this is. I think that might be an important discussion. So this is Poetic Justice. Matthew stood amidst brilliant blue cornflowers atop the English hilltop, lifted his laced black leather dress shoe from a carpet of grass, and watched as the once flattened, shoe-shaped patch of grass arched its back and rose triumphantly toward the clouds. Never taking his eyes off the mist-covered grass, the pudgy 35-year-old pinched his tan wool pant leg at the knee and placed his foot on the ground nearby. If grass could speak of hope, he said, what might you say? Ears strained for insight, eyes widened, every available sense waited. He'd find solace soon enough, he knew. No person had ever confided in him like she always did. He pulled a small red notebook from his rear pocket and thumbed the pages until he found the inked page marked boldly as Hope. He unclipped a fountain pen from his light gray suspenders. Easily and fluidly, he wrote below it, strong grass, may be trampled or stepped upon, yet it will rise to survive. For where there is hope, there is strength. Pleased, he rose to his feet and walked several yards into a ring of interlaced trees. One in particular interested him. Its soft breath rustled in the lively wind. In response, he hurried beside it. Magnificent in stature and grace, its leaves of green quivered when Matthew looked upon them, and the majestic sun cast slender oval shadows across his sunburned face. With his ears still awake, he absorbed the impressions sent to him. He opened his notebook and found an empty page with no heading. Pen to the page, he transcribed the tree's wisdom. In spite of age or appearance, will a tree reach out its branches? In matters of charity, a man could learn much from a tree. Upon their exposure to air, the freshly birthed words grew in meaning and began to take root in Matthew's understanding. This made him happy, but seconds later, fingers of air flipped and tossed the pages and frustrated his attempts to return to the poem. Wind, he said, please allow me to understand the one before you speak. I love you all more than my own kind, but my patience has limits. That is page 1. It is, what genre do you believe this to be? And granted, you don't have the advantage of seeing it on the page, so I do apologize for that. But based on what you heard, what do you think we've got? Craig says something Victorian era, perhaps. What else we got? That's all we got. That's what we have so far. Oh, an adventure novel. Mitchell says adventure novel. It's not a final draft and not publishing. Okay, cool. Thank you, Joey, for clarifying that. What else we got? Joe, what did you think of the, speaking as for the genre, first of all, what do you think?
Initially, at first glance, I thought literary fiction.
Okay.
Because I wondered if the interaction between the main character and the tree and the grass was all in his head.
Yeah, so the way it was presented, for those of you at home, is that it was a magical realism short story for YA and up. Which, let's address that first of all. I would advise you keep the number of genres as short as possible. And I see this all the time. It's a YA steampunk romance vampire, what I'm like, dude, no, it's not. It's a YA, and then you get one more, dude. That's it. If you're gonna pitch it to an agent, you got to keep that as tight as possible. Because I see this in query letters frequently on Fiverr. I'll get people say, well, it's for, like 13 to, 55. I'm like, no, but it's not. You want to think it is, but it's not, because there isn't a section in Barnes & Noble that says 13 to 55. There's a section for teen and there's a section for adult. You got to pick one. That's the first thing. Now, I'm not going to argue with the writer that lots of ages might enjoy it. Of course they might, but we have to approach this from a business perspective, from a marketing perspective, and ask, where exactly in Barnes & Noble is this going to be shelved? Where on Amazon? Now, Amazon, you're going to get this whole string of subcategories, right? And that's a different topic that maybe we'll touch on tonight. But in terms of going traditional, I think you need to say it's this and maybe one other thing. Joe, how do you feel about that?
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yes.
Categories are for marketing reasons, but they do tend to confound publishers to some extent. And I'll give you an example from my own body of work. I wrote a series called the Great Undead War series. So it's zombie alternate history with steampunk elements. And so during the marketing meeting with the promotional staff at HarperCollins, myself and the editor said, that's what it is. And the lead promotional rep said, okay, but which is it? Is it alternate history? Is it zombies? Or is it steampunk? Of course, my answer was yes. And they didn't know what to do with it. They had a really hard time because they couldn't put it in a box.
Yeah.
When you're working with traditional publishers, as you well know, they put everything in boxes. And if they can't put it in one major box, then they just push it to the side. It's too much effort. It's too much work. Agents especially do that. So the more, lines you have, the more categories you have, the more confounding it is for them.
So the way it's presented, the way Joey presented it to us, for those of you at home, again, was magical realism short story for YA and up. So seeing that and then reading that this first page is about a 35-year-old person, I'm going to say, well, it's not YA. Immediately, you're done. Even if on page 2, he's going to be recalling his youth and the rest of the story is going to be about his childhood or about his teenage years or whatever, which I don't necessarily recommend. In the same way that just because a story is told from a 12-year-old's point of view doesn't mean it's YA or middle grade. I always use The Body by Stephen King as an example of that, which is a phenomenal short story. It was a great movie, Stand By Me, but it's not YA by any stretch of the imagination. The tone isn't there. The treatment isn't there. The movie maybe skews YA a little bit, but even then, if you compare that to like Perks of Being a Wallflower or The Breakfast Club, anything in the John Hughes canon, like that's not really Stand By Me. It's a very grown-up film told by 12-year-olds, So in this case, Joey, if this was something you were going to pitch to a magazine or a website, something like that, anything that you weren't publishing yourself, depending, of course, on what happens on page 2, I would pick just the one thing like magical realism. Cool. I'm down with magical realism, by the way.
Yeah.
The way he's talking and the voice that you use here, which I think is spot on. He's got a great voice. Let me say that up front too.
So a couple comments to discuss the YA issue for a moment. If this had been a novel and it had been sent to an agent, that YA and then the 35-year-old character would have made the agent stop reading because of that contradiction. So be very careful of that kind of thing. I always tell my clients, the agent's looking for any excuse to put your piece aside. So you have to make sure in those first several pages, they don't have any excuse whatsoever. And it can be the stupidest minor little excuse, but they'll use it to move on to the next thing in their stack. So be aware of that. I talked about my criteria to make sure everything's correct on a page or not too confusing. There were 2 things that jumped out immediately at me. Number 1, there's the line where he says he was pleased and he rose to his feet.
Yes.
He's always on his feet. There's nowhere in the text that says he bends over, he kneels, he sits down, he pulls at the leg of his pants, which gives me the idea he's hitching up his pants to sit down or maybe kneel down, but he never does that.
Yeah.
And then there's the use of the word breathe for breath, which you read correctly, but in the text itself, it's misspelled.
Yes.
Those 2 things would have stopped me reading right there. because on the first page, I've already got 3 contradictory things: the YA issue, the part about him not being seated or getting up, and then the misuse of the word breathe versus breath. So I would have put it down. And an agent or an editor at a magazine will do the same thing.
And I want to point out too, in the first paragraph, there's a lot of repetition. We've got a lot of green and a lot of grass, and that gets very wearying. And I only pick on that because I get picked on a lot by editors for that, because they'll go through it, they highlight the shit out of that. Yes. Like every time you say green, there's a little yellow mark, and you're like, my God, it's 8 times on one page. Because when you're writing it, you don't see it, and somebody has to point it out. So I'm pointing it out for you to, and I would look at the whole page. How many times you use green, how many times you use grass, and you don't want to necessarily, because this is another lesson I've learned, you don't necessarily want to thesauricize every use and go, well, I'm going to do green on this one, verdant on
the next,
emerald on that. Like, no, that you're just cluttering now. But finding other ways to phrase what you need to get across, I think, would be good.
The other thing I noted about that opening paragraph, it's what I call muddy, in the sense that there's a lot of adjective words. So,
yes.
You know, he describes the grass, he describes the pants, there's too many of them. If I'm picking out how many descriptive words you are using, rather than just following the flow of the story, you've lost me at that point. So cut back. If the color of the pants isn't necessary to, for a plot point or something, just say he's wearing pants. The funny thing is as writers, if we don't fill in the descriptive details, the reader's mind will automatically do it for them. If I say he's wearing a jean jacket, most people think it's blue without me saying blue. Maybe it was black. Maybe it was tan. They make jean jackets in those colors, but the reader will automatically think blue. So give just enough to set the tone, and then let the reader's imagination fill in the rest. So
our next piece is entitled All That Trouble. And there is no genre given, so we'll just roll it and see what you all think. All That Trouble, first page. Wondering if the dramatic change I'd made in life since receiving my GED improved things, I pulled my 2011 Camry into the complex's parking lot shortly after 10:30 p.m. My terrier Shih Tzu in the backseat barked, trying to climb up front. "Rambo, hush," I ordered, not looking back at the dog. I knew my small companion felt overjoyed to be home. We'd been gone since around 9 a.m. I went to class at the Herschel Anthony's Trade School from 10 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays for a plumber's certification. Then I worked from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. on weekdays at the Oakland Plaza for the cleaning crew, making sure 24 offices, 6 bathrooms, 2 stairwells, 2 sets of elevators, 1 lobby, and several hallways looked immaculate. Whether in school or at work, Rambo always came with me and stayed in the car. I was able to check on him every hour or two, where I let him out to do his business and refill the water bowl I kept in the back for him. I had to take the dog with me to school and work because some neighbor I had in the building I lived in, the Dorstein Apartments, said he cried and barked the entire time I was away. If any complaints went to the manager and or landlord, I didn't hear about them. I didn't want to take a chance on having anyone else fuss. After I parked, Rambo barked again. "Rambo, shut up." I shut off the car. After departing the Camry, I let Rambo out of the back, hooked a leash to his collar, let him jump on me, and then walked him to the nearby courtyard. After urinating, he barked at a car driving along the road and tried to run at it. "Rambo, no!" I pulled back on the leash. I walked Rambo along the side of the building to the glass doors and into the lobby. I'd lived in Oakland for 3 months, had been attending school for 2, and have had Rambo for about a month and a half. Upon getting approved to live there, I learned that small dogs were allowed. Many of the elder residents had therapy dogs. Once I had time, I went to the Humane Society of Pittsburgh and adopted a dog that I named after Sylvester Stallone's character in the 1980s action-adventure movie First Blood, because it's one of my favorite 1980s movies. That is page 1. Okay, so I love the Rambo part right off the bat. Like, you hooked me there because Rambo, that's great, and the fact that he's a terrier Shih Tzu, which I can't say Shih Tzu without smiling anyway. So you combine those two, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna keep going. I want to see what else this guy's got. Um, so that's cool. What else? I, for one, like, where is it here? Where'd it go? Oh, it's the second paragraph. I actually really enjoy the list of all the stuff that the character has to clean. I think it's funny. I think it's humorous. Yeah, and I like that. And that's, again, kind of keeping in with what we're talking about so far tonight. I like the opening voice. Whoever this person is, I assume it's a guy. I don't think we know for sure. I don't see anything in there that indicates whether this is a man or a woman. I believe that the author is male, so I'm going to assume that the narrator is male. May not be. And that's kind of one of the things you might want to specify somewhere in there with a name or some kind of indicator of at least what kind of sex we're looking at. So anyway, love the voice up front. The main issue I have is that nothing's happened yet. We've got some good dog stuff, which is cool. I'm wondering if Rambo is going to be a major factor in whatever the plot is, because we're spending an awful lot of time with him, which is cool, as long as in page 2 and so on, Rambo is going to factor very heavily into whatever the plot is. Also assuming that this is a novel, it may not be. So you've got a little bit more, I mean, you do have some more breathing room in a first page, I suppose, in a novel than you do in a short story. However, there's no real obstacle or conflict yet. And I need something to kind of rub up against here in this first page, if at all possible. Now, again, it might be one of those things where the very next paragraph, he's attacked by ninjas. Okay, and we're just missing it. It's entirely possible. I certainly hope so, because you've got a dog named Rambo, so there better be some ninjas in there. So up until the first paragraph and second paragraph, where we've got the list of all the things that are being cleaned, it's a lot of backstory, and I feel like you could cut a lot of this and move it somewhere else in the book. Let's get the story moving. If something's going to happen with Rambo here shortly, one of the residents comes out and kicks him, or there's some kind of conflict, whatever it is. Let's cut out as much of this backstory as possible and move that conflict up to begin quickly. Even if it's not the main conflict, at least something to give us a little bit of struggle. And I know, Joe, if I remember correctly, you and I both come from the school where some hint of the major obstacle should be present by the end of chapter 1. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
At least, and I think hint is the right word. We don't have to lay it all out, but just
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. So I've got some good. Why don't you go ahead, Joe?
I think this is a great example of how two people with similar backgrounds can look at a piece entirely differently. Because for me, a lot of the detail felt very extraneous. In particular, the room list, which you just highlighted as something that you enjoyed. For me, it was like, I don't care. I don't care if there were 10 bathrooms or 47 bedrooms or whatever it is. I want to know, they spent the time cleaning. I could fill in the rest myself. I want you to move on and get to something that happens. I mean, I think that is where we agree. There's not a lot that goes on here. If I take out the descriptive stuff, if I take out when they go to school, when they go to work, the times their shifts are, how many bathrooms and bedrooms and all that they clean, all that wipes out half the text. And I'm left with a lot less to sink my teeth into. So that was one issue that jumped out at me. I laughed about the Rambo dog thing as you did, for the sake of, you name your Chihuahua Killer, I mean, a terrier and Rambo, that didn't seem to go with me. And that made it interesting. That made it funny. That made it, a play on words kind of approach. I have a very large Rottweiler named Beowulf. When I think of, Rambo, Beowulf, and that kind of thing, I'm thinking big dog, and here's this little terrier. I would keep reading because I want to know if the terrier is going to get away and get run over by a truck or something. I mean, that's what I'm waiting for. The dog's barking, he's on the leash, so I'm waiting for something bad to happen to the terrier. And I tell you, if you kill the terrier in the first couple pages, nobody will ever buy your book. So make sure the terrier lives. That's yeah. You can't be cruel to dogs in the first chapter. So what else? It did give me a sense of setting. When reading it, the first several paragraphs, I was like, okay, major American city. I don't know where, but major American city. And then he gets to Oakland. And I'm like, okay, I was right. Major American city, great. It gives us a sense of who the main character is, but they never identify male, female, name, anything like that. But I get the sense because of the voice, as we've talked about previously this evening. So I think that's important. I think that works very well. I am curious. I have no idea if it's a male or female. My hunch would be male because they're an action movie fan, but that is such a sexist comment that, it doesn't even deserve to be said. I mean, it's just a hunch based on my prejudices. It
Right,
very well may be a female character. And if it is, even better. I think that's great when you play with those kind of things. In terms of genre, I have absolutely no idea. Mm-hmm. I don't have a clue what this book is about or where it's going. And sometimes that's what happens with a first page. I mean, that's fine. You've got me wanting to know what happens to the dog, so I'll keep reading. So eventually you're going to tell me what that genre is. But right now, I don't have any clue.
Yeah. Would you prefer, again, like a little punch of salt there to kind of give us a whiff of what may be coming? Is that crucial on that first page, do you think, for something like this?
I don't think it's crucial because they mastered, the first commandment, make it interesting so I keep reading. Mm-hmm. If you don't capture me that way, I better know what the genre is so that I keep reading to see if I get interested. I might pick up I read a lot of supernatural thrillers or military science fiction, and if I pick a book up that has a cover that tells me that, even if the first page doesn't tell me, I'll keep reading because I know, hey, this is the kind of book I like.
Yes.
If this was just a stack of manuscript pages and I have no clue what that genre is, if you don't capture me on page one, I stop reading.
Yeah.
And I think it bears to be said, some people will give a book longer than others.
That's true.
I've gotten to the point in my life where if I don't like something on page 1 or 2, I'm done. Even if it's one of those books where, 100 of my friends recommended it and said, keep watching or keep reading, I won't.
What's fun about this is, I love that second paragraph, and Joe's like, I would cut it. And so now it's up to you. What do you do? And I think maybe this is something else we can talk about for a second, Joe. Oh, and I have another question for you. Is there comes that point for all of us where we've gotten feedback and 5 people said keep it and 5 people said cut it, and now you're in the middle going, what the hell do I do? You're gonna have to trust yourself at some point. That sucks, but you have to. And learning to develop that voice, like we've been talking about, saying, no, this character would say that. I'm gonna stick with it. And we've had author friends, and we've probably done it too, where there's been a little bit of a fight for something in particular where you're like, no, it really needs to be this way, or the whole story kind of falls apart. And that becomes really interesting when you talk with editors, right, Joe?
Yes.
Yep. Moving on.
I think that's a great topic to cover. Newer writers have this propensity to get involved in writing groups or critique groups with people who are at their same level. And so somebody will read something, they'll get, 9 responses from the folks in their group, and those responses will either be all over the map or everybody says the same thing. But here's the thing, the advice is only worth the experience of the person giving it. And so if they don't know what they're talking about, their advice could be right, could be wrong. You don't know. It's a little different when, say, early in my career, I went to the Borderlands boot camp out in Baltimore.
Oh, yeah.
Which is run by 4 very senior veteran writers. They always have a guest editor. The year I went, Ginger Buchanan, the executive editor of Ace and Rock Books, was their guest teacher. So I knew anything they said in relation to my piece that I submitted for the workshop was worth listening to, because these are people with a great amount of experience behind them. So I think that A is number 1. But then there comes that point where, as you said, you have to trust your gut. I mean, sometimes what you want to do is the right thing for reasons those other people don't know. They haven't read deep enough into the book. They don't know what's going to happen. A variety of different things can impact that. So for me, whenever I get information from somebody else, it's always, okay, what's their background? How many other people are saying this? If I send out a book before publication to 20 people and all 20 of them come back and say, hey, this is unbelievable in chapter 4, yeah, that tends to tell me maybe I better take a look at that and at least consider what they're saying.
I want to say thanks to my good buddy Joe. Thank you very much, Joe. Really appreciate your time and calling in from overseas over there like you are. That's pretty. How's the quarantine going over there? Pretty good.
Thanks, man. It was fun. I always love to come on your show.
Good. Thank you very much. All right, guys. As always, may you be happy. May you be safe. May you be well, and may you be peaceful and at ease. And we will see you next week, same time. Tell your friends. All right. Take care, everybody.